Well, one of the other themes that I want to explore in the text in the time that we have is to talk about rhetoric in this novel. It's something that I wrote on years ago, an article I did for Lamar Journal of the Humanities. It's not a terribly famous article, but it was fun to write, and it was something that nobody really had looked at before, and I've always thought it was a very, very prominent aspect of the novel if you just read carefully enough, and I guess folks have agreed ever since then, but it is certainly, there are numerous places in the novel where rhetoric and oratory are introduced to us, beginning with, for example, the discussion early on about the debates between Pleyel and Wieland and all of these that take place out at the temple. There's a bust of Cicero. There's just all kinds of things. And in fact, Clara's whole examination, the way she examines things through these epistolary letters, is for her to sort of debate back and forth in her own mind. So debate and oratory and all of these kinds of things, even down to the fact that a lot of the stuff that's written in here reads like sort of a legal transcript or a deposition in a way. There's a constant weighing of evidence back and forth to try to decide what's true and what's not true. A finding of fact is very, very important. You even see this early in the novel, as I said, not just with the introduction of the material about Cicero and all of this in the debates, but early on in chapter 4, you see this one passage where she talks about one afternoon in May, the blandness of the air, etc. They were in the temple. My brother and Pleyel were bandying quotations and syllogisms. The point discussed was the merit of the oration of Cluentius, as descriptive first of the genius of the speaker, and secondly of the manners of the times. Pleyel labored to extenuate both these species of merit, and tasked his ingenuity to show that the orator had embraced a bad cause, or at least a doubtful one. He urged that to rely on the exaggerations of an advocate, or to make the picture of a single family a model from which to sketch the condition of a nation, was absurd. The controversy was suddenly diverted into a new channel by a misquotation. Pleyel accused his companion of saying policiatur when it should have been policeratur. Nothing would decide the contest but an appeal to the volume, so he runs back up to the house to go get the volume. That's when he hears the voice, and so on and so forth. The thing to remember, and as I sort of traced years ago in this article, is debates happen, but truth never emerges. Arguments ensue, but nothing's ever settled. Truth and all of that, it's never a situation. Never in the novel do you see an argument or an oration or a speech solve anything or answer anything. They always end up either unresolved or unconvincing. And you see this in a lot of different places. If you want to turn to some other passages, I'll point them out for you real quickly. First of all, we also note that Carwin, of all people, is probably the best rhetorician, and yet we can't trust a thing that he says. You see? In chapter 8, for example, she even acknowledges this. She says, his narratives were constructed with so much skill and rehearsed with so much energy that all the effects of a dramatic exhibition were frequently produced by them. Those that were most coherent and most minute, and of consequence least entitled to credit, were yet rendered probable by the exquisite art of this rhetorician. So you see this again and again throughout. Carwin is the best of all the rhetoricians, and he's the most untrustworthy that there is. If you flip a couple of other chapters on over, you'll see that particularly in chapter 16, rhetoric as it's depicted in that chapter, the arguments, the back and forth, the speeches and whatnot, it fails. It fails to help us arrive at truth. It fails to persuade. It fails to do anything but to dazzle, and in some cases maybe dangerously mislead us emotionally. And here again, Clara is that wonderful in-between pivotal figure who could go one way or the other. Unlike Wieland, she's rather skeptical of the mystical and the emotional and the intuitive, but on the other hand, she also doesn't necessarily fully trust or embrace Pleyel's vision. She believes in her heart of hearts that there's something more out there to the world than just rational and logical thought. And so she's our focus, right? Reality defies a rhetorical framework. It won't be framed by words. And again, over and over and over again, you see her talking about the fact that can't express what I felt or saw in words. Words are inadequate. Words can't describe. I cannot frame what I saw or experienced with mere words, etc. And you see that she can't formulate those thoughts into words. She's our focus. She's our proof. She's our test case that there are people who use language to try to persuade other people. They don't succeed. She tries to use language to describe and to accurately convey reality of what happened in the natural world and what she perceives, and she's incapable of doing it. She says, alas, my heart droops and my fingers are enervated. My ideas are vivid, but my language is faint. Now know I what it is to entertain incommunicable sentiments. The chain of subsequent incidents is drawn through my mind and being linked with those which forewent, by turns rouse up agonies and sink me into hopelessness. Yet will I persist to the end. My narrative may be invaded by inaccuracy and confusion, but if I live no longer, I will at least live to complete it. What but ambiguities, abruptnesses, and dark transitions can be expected from the historian who is at the same time the sufferer of these disasters, right? All of us have our own individual perspective, and that in some ways handicaps us from being able adequately and fully to express the circumstances we experience, because it's only from one perspective. So, I mean, you can get into all of the different aspects and different angles of this. You can take a quick look way over towards the end of the narrative in chapter 22, where she says that I came as a repentant criminal. This is by the way, this is Carwin, and he gives a very lengthy speech, and it's a good speech. He gives an explanation. Look at how carefully crafted his words are here. He is a real master rhetorician. He says, I am not this villain. I have slain no one. I have prompted none to slay. I have handled a tool of wonderful efficacy without magnificent intentions, but with caution. Look at the schemes that he uses and the tropes that he uses. Unfortified by principle, subjected to poverty, stimulated by headlong passion, I made this powerful engine subservient to the supply of my wants, right? Unfortified to principle, subjected to poverty, stimulated by headlong passion. Do you see how he's arranged that very carefully with the alliteration and the careful sentence structure and whatnot? And all of this indicates that he's giving a great speech which signifies nothing, because we can't tell at the end of it whether any of what he's saying is the least bit true. We cannot rely on it. So if we can't rely on our senses and we can't rely on rhetoric to help us understand, then what do we have? Essentially, we have nothing, because there's no way for us to be able to understand the world other than through language and through our senses. If you look again, I believe it's in chapter, let's see here, in chapter 22, is that? No, I'm sorry, chapter 16 once again. Turn the page from that original section there where she talks about incommunicable sentiments. And you can reference this passage to that Carwin speech that I just mentioned way late in the novel. There was folly in expecting your compliance with my invitation. Judge how I was disappointed in finding another in your place. I have waited, but to wait any longer would be perilous. I shall seek an interview, but it must be at different time and place. Meanwhile, I will write this. How will you bear? How inexplicable will be this transaction? An event so unexpected, a sight so horrible. Such was this abrupt and unsatisfactory script. Okay, so snatching up this paper, she reads Carwin's handwriting, and even in written form, not even in oral form, but in written form, she says, I can't fathom what he's trying to say. So what you see is the failure of language, either in oral or written form, to fully relate events, to fully relate reality. Not only is it incapable of that, it frequently misleads or obfuscates, you see? So rational debate is called into question because the tool we use to debate, language, is not capable of constructing an understandable world and a coherent grasp of our experiences. This has political implications. Think about them for a moment. New republic, right? A new republican constitutional form of government, democratic. If you believe what the implications are of what Brown is laying out here, then you have to believe that democracy is doomed. You have to believe that, don't you? Because if debate is meaningless, full of sound and fury signifying nothing because it doesn't help us arrive at truth, then Cicero is a clown and the Republican form of government is essentially, a farce. But the question is, how far does Brown go with this? Does Brown really doubt the ability of language to improve understanding? Well, before you sign off on that and say, wow, look at that, yes, he is doing this, you have to stop and say, but wait a minute, he's a writer, for heaven's sakes. He uses words for a living. He can't believe in his heart of hearts that writing, that language doesn't help us understand something about the world, any more than you can say that just because our senses fool us, that our senses aren't reliable at all. Well, of course they're reliable. The issue isn't whether we can or can't learn through the senses. We can. The issue isn't whether we can or can't learn through language, or that we can't understand the world through debate or rhetoric. We can. The issue is, can we rely on these wholly? And the answer to Brown seems to be no. Now, given that, the question that we have to ask that he never answers is, so when and under what circumstances are we entitled to be skeptical? How do we know when to rely on our senses and when not to? How do we know when to believe something that is framed in a particular way through language and when not to? There, we're not given an answer at all.